Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got an exceptional guest today. He lives in the Heidelberg area in Germany, where he works as a director of design strategy at SAP and promotes user experience design as a visiting lecturer at a University of Applied Sciences. He works in information technology and has since 1998 helping truly global companies in many countries, including Argentina, Brazil, China, Germany, India, Hong Kong, Mexico, the Netherlands, Poland, Emirates, and the United States, helping them to create great user experience through advocating design and innovation principles. Please join me in welcoming Itamar Medeiros. Welcome, Itamar.
Well, well, thanks, Thomas. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You ready for 20 questions?
Yes, I'm ready for 20 questions.
Great. Number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Yeah, well, I'm Itamar. I'm from Brazil originally, but for the last 17 years, I've been living abroad. In 2005, I moved to Shanghai. I think that's where we've met a long time ago. And then in 2012, I moved to Germany. So basically, I'm reaching that point of my life that I've lived more time abroad than I lived in my home country, right? And currently, as you mentioned in the intro there, I'm working as director of design strategy. That's what you see in my business card, but what it means in practical terms is like I'm helping people translate product roadmaps and decisions and strategy into what does it mean for the end user in terms of like what is the experience strategy. That's what I do. That's what I'm currently do these days.
Great. Yeah. Just for a note for our audience, Itamar and I think are mainly connected because we both worked as lecturers at a design school in Shanghai pretty early in our careers.
That's right.
So question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Yeah, so I work in the technology industry, right? Let's say for the last 25 years, I've been working with software. And in every company that I've ever worked with, the ratio of designers to basically everyone else is very small, right? So for example, you have a team of like one designer to five developers or maybe three testers. And what I notice is the skills that designers have, at least by education, things like exploring the problem space or challenging the status quo and try to reframe problems before jumping to solutions places designers in a very unique position in terms of helping teams really come up with innovative solutions, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is like what makes us different is exactly the skills that we designers take for granted, right? Like we kind of tend to think that we everybody else thinks just like us, right? But the idea of like taking a step back and ask ourselves like, what is the problem we're trying to solve here, can actually be very transformational to a lot of projects that I've been involved.
Great. Yeah. Another note, if you're interested in the Brazil angle of this episode, be sure to check out our recent episode with Bruno Porto. He's also coming from Brazil. Question three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so I've been involved with technology very early on. So I got my, and this was a long, like feels like a lifetime away. I got my first computer, an Apple II, when I was 9 years old.
Hmm.
And I remember geeking out and learning how to program it and learn basic and everything. And I mean, that was fun for a while, but I realized that the life of a programmer there's a lot of solitude. People sitting in front of a computer, writing code and stuff. And there was something that didn't really appeal to me after a while. But I did get hooked into the community that these technologies created, right? So back then, like we would go to each other's house, help each other write software, check what was going on. So as I would spend time with friends trying to figure out why a particular routine work or doesn't work, that was kind of really exciting to me, like the connection that I was established with other people through the technology, right? So And that kind of that was something that also played a lot in when I finally went to design school many years later, right? Let's say as a designer, there's a craft kind of artistry side of things where you're sitting on your computer and designing things. But there's a lot of the execution that you depend on collaborating with other people, right? So even the simplest forms of graphic design, for example, you have to collaborate with a printer, you have to collaborate with someone that is actually on the execution side of things. So that's where that's what really got me into the technology, right? Let's say the day like the kind of work that I do today, I have to spend a lot of time talking to other people. So that's why it really got me excited. Not the technology per se, but the communities of practice that you have to engage with to bring a product or service to life. It's,
Yeah, I often talk about my design education decades ago now of being a real kind of ivory tower design education where I was the one designer trying to make the perfect thing and how that's changed so much and how collaborative it is these days.
mhm.
I don't know if you started out in the same way or not, but
Oh
it's
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
can totally
shifted.
relate.
Yeah. Great. Okay, number four, what does your future look like?
So I've been doing this long enough in technology to realize that automation is coming sooner than most people think it will. Like so, I think when I first got to school, and I guess you can relate to this, like oh I have my computer and I have Corel Draw and I have my computer and I have Photoshop. I have my computer and replace with whatever tool is the coolest tool in the moment, right? Let's say your brain and your tool was enough for you to kind of create a name, create a career for yourself. I think it's gonna come sooner than most people expect. That some of the real creative work that we tend to associate our craft with is going to be replaced by um, artificial intelligence, right? And I
Mhm.
guess let's say if you go to any social network today, you're going to see a lot of things like, for example, artificial intelligence generated art and so on, which was something unimaginable just a couple of years ago, right? So I think the future, what's going to look like for people like us is like we're going to have to reposition ourselves in terms of what is it that we do, right? So if we're not sitting in front of the computers and pushing pixels, because computers can do that for us, then what do we do, right? I personally think that designers should kind of rebrand themselves instead of not so much the problem solvers, but more like the people that facilitate the discussions that allow teams to solve problems, right? So that is not for the, I've been telling a lot of people that I talk with that I say like, usually it's not for the lack of ideas that people cannot be creative. It's usually all the friction that it takes of people having multiple opinions or different perspectives and so on. I think designers could be really well positioned to kind of be the facilitators of these teams coming together and solving complex problems, right? So
Great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you bring up artificial intelligence. We had a guest on the show, Dr. Philippe Pasquier, who runs the AI lab at Simon Fraser University here in
mhm.
Vancouver, and talks a lot about how his research is very sought after these days, and how he has that kind of attention on what he does these days. So yeah, I can
Mhm.
definitely relate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think what's gonna happen is this. The work like that people traditionally associate with empathy, right? So for example, understand someone else's perspective so you can solve a problem for them. I think those will take a hard time. Like these are still gonna take a long time for people to replace with artificial intelligence, right? But everything else that you can describe the task in some relatively well-known sets of steps, those are going to be replaced. I mean, there's going to be an accelerating curve of replacement by artificial intelligence. At least that's my opinion, right? So,
Great. Okay. Number five, this one's unique to this podcast. Let's talk about location. How does the
mhm.
notion of place play into what you do?
Well, I mean, for location as in a physical place
It can
plays a
be.
very small role in in the kind of the work that I do, like compared to at least what most people tend to think of a 9 to 5 job, right? So even before the pandemic, at least for the last 15 years of my career, I've been working on teams that are either completely distributed, right? In the sense that, let's say, the teams are not in the physical location, like members of the teams are not in in the same physical location. Sometimes they're not even in the physical, in the same time zone, right? So, for example, I had teams that I'm in Shanghai, and then the as a design manager, and then the software development manager is in Switzerland somewhere, and the product management is in the Silicon Valley, and we are of several, like a dozen of time zones away. So, so even in my current job, like I count on the hands of, like in the fingers of a couple of my both hands, the amount of times I had to go to the office for the last 3 years, right? Because most of my counterparts, the people that I have to interact with, are either in India or China or Australia, right? So to me, um, to me, place is not a physical location. I mean, location is not a physical place. Location is more like where the expertise and where the decision making um, power is located, right? So that's how I tend to think about it.
We recently had John Maeda on the show, who was a leader at Automatic, the parent company for WordPress. And they were doing remote work really early on. So he was entirely remote during that time, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that comes up a lot on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Number six, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Well, I mean, here's something that I would tell my younger self, right? Facts don't influence people. People influence people, right? I made this mistake many times in early in my career, that I would engage in a conversation where I would try to convince people. Like if I were to elaborate my opinion well enough, or if I bring enough facts to the discussion, I will be able to get people to go my way. Right? So as a designer, I think there's quite a lot of that sense. Let's say I want people to go my way. And I learned throughout the years that there's just not enough data that you can dump on people to convince them. Most of the times, what happens, like, you need to build trust and credibility before people listen to you, right? So if I could travel back in time and talk to my younger self, I would definitely try to encourage him to spend more time building relationships with people instead of just trying to convince them.
That makes a lot of sense. I just finished a master's where part of the focus was on classical rhetorical theory and how people kind of get convinced in that way. And yeah, that's a super interesting topic, I think.
Hmm.
Um, Number seven, what's a day in your life like?
Well, both my wife and I work, and we have 3 kids. So kind of getting everybody to run like, we need to run the house like a clock, right? In a sense of um, getting the kids ready to school and so on. So we have to be really, our routine is pretty much scheduled around our children's schedules, right? So which is great, thanks to the flexibility of working from home. So that means that I can be a few hours away from my desk when I need to pick up the kids at school or drop them for soccer practice and stuff. But also means that my days are really long, right? But so that the hours that I'm not available during the day, because I'm helping with family and stuff, I usually have to make up um, some other time, right? And also, I guess the fact that my colleagues are in other time zones, that means that once I kiss my kids goodnight, I have to go back to my home office and do a few more hours of meetings, right? So that means that my days are long with a few interruptions throughout the day, right? So I don't have a typical 9 to 5 kind of working schedule.
I'm in many ways the same way, probably because of the kinds of similarities in our careers. But
Hmm.
yeah, some days in the middle of the day I have nothing, and then I have to be up in the middle of the night, kind of talking to India or other parts of the world.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's quite chaotic, but I think it's the new normal.
I mean, I can imagine that some people get really frustrated with that kind of interruptions. Others, I mean, at some point I just decided to not fight it, right? I try to build my live rhythm around those rhythms, right? So I actually look at into the kind of the and from the, let's say, the good perspective, right? Let's say the fact that I'm here in Germany, but I'm interacting with people in India, in
Mm.
China, in US, kind of gets me exposed to many different cultures, and I get to learn from a lot of different people that otherwise I wouldn't if I just work with the people in this particular region that I am right now. And so
Mm.
I tend to look at it the positive side at least.
It's an interesting point. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada now, and am very aware that I could be anywhere and be online and kind of be doing the same thing. But actually, I believe that less now. I feel like being in Vancouver kind of puts me on a good time zone to interact properly with different people in different places. And if I were based in India or another place, I wouldn't have access to those kind of normal hours that give you the kinds of meetings that you want to have and put you in the in a place where you're not always up in the middle of the night. I mean, those kinds of things do impact
That's
uh,
right.
your work life.
That's right.
Yeah. Number eight, lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
Well, I mean, I've been blessed to be exposed to the concept of reflective practice early in my career when I was doing my master's. So I spent quite a lot of time reflecting on my own experiences, right? Let's say, and well, I guess call it journaling, um, call it meditation, call it mindfulness. I try to be very structured about when something, let's say, as I'm working throughout my day or as I'm completing projects, I tend to look at them, take a step back and look at them and reflect on what happened so I can learn from them, from my own experiences, right? So I really encourage. There's a couple of frameworks around it. Like probably the most famous one is like Gibson's reflection in action and the method that I really encourage people to give it a shot. And that, when I combine with my passion for reading, makes it a really good combination of that helps me to constantly learn. Um, and I share most of these reflections, like all these things that I'm learning as I'm completing projects or I'm reading something. I share it on my blog.
Mm,
Blogs are probably not as popular as they used to, but I mean, I've been writing a blog for 15 years now.
mm.
So I just keep it as a habit of blogging around things that I find exciting, and it's also a way to learn. Like by sitting down and having to reflect and structuring your thoughts into in a written form that other people can understand and probably more important can react to, like provide your comments, ask you questions and stuff. It really helps you grow and keep yourself, like keep you on your toes when it comes to learning.
Great. Tools. What tools do you use? Are you entirely digital?
Well, I mean, these days, yeah. Because my work revolves of helping people make decisions, so like 90% of my time I'm in front of a whiteboard of some kind with post-its and sketches and stuff. So when before the pandemic, that would be like a physical whiteboard with lots of post-its and sharpies and stuff. But these days with the pandemic, is mostly digital, which actually was a good thing that happened. I mean, I know that there was a tragic aspect of this whole pandemic, the amount of lives that were lost. But in terms of the l- leveling the playing field when it comes to everybody being available for things like workshops, it was a real blessing for us. I remember before the pandemic, we would have to schedule a workshop, and there was all these like logistics of having to fly people from all different locations, and there's not enough budget, so we do like a workshop once a year. to get people to align. Now basically we can schedule like a workshop a month and basically tap on the knowledge and the expertise of basically everyone in the company, because everyone is just like a Zoom meeting away from a workshop, right? So I mean, I know, I mean, with all the all the tragedy that happened with the pandemic, I think there was something good that came out of it.
I think I brought it up in the last episode, but I'm super curious about the VR workrooms and how those can affect these kinds of meetings. It's really early days for that still, obviously, but
Well, I mean, so here's the next. I mean, the few things that I've experimented with is like, for example, Cisco has these telepresence virtual rooms where you have projections on the rooms that let's say the quality of the light and the scale of people being projected and the quality of the sound and the real low latency that it has between like the people being projected on the screen and you seeing them, it really makes them feel like you're in the actual like same room, right?
mhm.
So I mean, it was a fascinating concept. The only challenge though is that it has that kind of formality. Let's say you everybody in this side of the room is in a table sitting on desks, like
Mm,
on chairs, and the people on, let's say, I don't know, on the other side of the Atlantic kind of have to sit in a similar setup, and
mm.
everybody's on chairs and in front of a desk, which is it's probably better than not seeing anyone. But on the other hand, it kind of creates this formality barrier, right? I say, where, like, it would be great to have a similar setup where people are kind of standing up in front of a whiteboard, right? Let's say that would be probably the coolest thing, if we could kind of replicate the kind of workshop experience, but somehow in a virtual or maybe augmented reality, right? So
Yeah, at the time of this recording, the Meta Quest Pro just came out recently, and I think it's one step towards improving that kind of experience. Halfway here, number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
well, as I mentioned earlier, like I do have a lot of work flexibility, so I do get to spend probably more time with family than most parents that have like a 9 to 5 job. But I also need to be, because let's say these interruptions and days are long and stuff, I have to be really conscious and disciplined about my physical activity and my energy levels, right? So when I do need to go somewhere for the office, for example, the few times I do have to go to the office or maybe I need to do some chores, I prefer to walk or maybe bike so that so that I can make some physical activity. And I try to seize as every break as a time that I can spend outside with nature.
Great.
Excuse me.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to take a pause.
Okay.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Should I? I guess should I?
It's okay. Take your time.
Should I? I'll be right back. Just let me get a glass of water, okay?
Great. No problem.
Sorry about that. Shall
Problem.
I just repeat
Sure,
the
yeah.
question?
Just kind of continue, I guess.
Yeah, so when it comes to work-life balance, I'm really thankful for the work flexibility that I have.
Hmm.
So I do get to spend a lot of time with my family. Then I guess the average 9 to 5 dad. But I also try to be very disciplined around my physical activity, right? So when I do need to go to the office or when I need to do chores around town, I prefer to walk or bike. And I do try to seize every break that I have as time that I can spend outside, right? So for example, right after lunch, maybe I just go around the block. Yeah, so that's how I try to, I mean, basically it's like being very mindful of my energy levels when it comes to physical activity.
Hmm. Yeah, I think our last guest, one of our recent guests talked about, yeah, being on the laptop and then kind of going outside into a river. That
Nice.
kind of life that we all always imagined kind of beginning to take hold as people shift out of the big cities and into a more comfortable work environment.
That's
Number
great.
11, yeah. Number 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Well, if I wasn't a designer, I guess I'll be either playing the bass or maybe be a freelance photographer. I guess as a freelance photographer, I could probably make a living. As a bass player, I will probably be having a lot of fun, but I will probably be a starving musician, so.
Nice. 12, what would you not like to do in terms of career?
When I, before I actually went to design, I thought, and given all the technology passion that I had, I thought I was going to go into engineering, right? It's either electrical engineering or computer science and stuff. I'm really glad that I didn't. Like I really love my career as a designer. I actually even started. I went 2 years. I was in a 4 year program for engineering, and then I dropped out in year two, and then go back to design. So I don't regret at all making that shift. So.
Nice. What's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Well, I mean, the work that I do, especially when it comes to design, has a lot to do with vision, right? It's helping people imagine a future that is kind of detached from the status quo. So I recently came across the writings of, I'm reading a lot about futurology and futurism and stuff.
Mm.
And one quote that I find fascinating is called the Dater's Law, which is any useful statement about the future should appear to be ridiculous, right? So the only way that you're going to be able to inspire people to think of a future that is different than the one that we are currently is like it needs to be, I mean, it needs to be so different than what we are today that it really breaks them, like it really snaps people out of the status quo thinking. So,
How about a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
oh yeah, that one. I recently walked into an office of a company. It was also a technology company, and there I saw this really funny quote that says, "Design is too important to be left for designers." And, like I think it's one of those companies that like embrace design thinking, and
Mm.
then all of a sudden everybody's a designer.
Mm.
I get it that, let's say, our profession, there's not enough of us out there to make up for the demand of design. I don't know if the solution is to is to kind of remove designer, like at least the way that the quote I read out, it looks like let's not leave the future for designers, which kind of rubbed me off in a very wrong way.
Mm. What's one word to describe yourself?
Oh, I would say curious.
Good. 16, what keeps you up at night?
Well, I'm the kind of person that when I put my head on the pillow, I tend to have an easy time going to sleep.
Mm.
I do ask myself sometimes, especially in the end of a day when I had a workshop with many people, it's like, did I help? Did I do my best to get people unstuck of a problem they were trying to solve?
Mm.
or did I help them make the best decision with the knowledge that they have at hand? And I think this is one that usually a lot of teams struggle. They want to make the best decision, and they tend to imagine, let's say, the decisions are final and there's like that is impossible to revisit, right? Let's say, and I try to even like help them and even help myself. Let's say, well, we made the best decision that we could today with the knowledge that we had, and if we learn something new, we can always come back and revisit that decision, right? So I try to do my best to think about it that way.
Nice. What's a dream you're chasing?
Well, I'm getting advanced in age. I mean, I guess I'm starting to think of the second half of my career.
Mm.
So I've been thinking a lot about what ending well means for me.
Mm.
Well, you and I have a passion for education, right? So I've been thinking a lot about at some point going back to teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I mean, one dream that I've been chasing is like what kind of upskilling, what kind of going back to school for me would look like in terms of training myself so that I can at some point go back to like a full-time career of teaching.
That's super interesting to hear from you because you have so much depth with your industry background and user experience. It's super. I imagine it would be kind of such a wealth of knowledge for the academy to kind of be able to tap into that.
Well, I mean, well, thanks first. I think, let's say, there's a way of thinking, I guess it takes. Let's say, when you go to the industry, you have a lot of, let's say, problem solving and a lot of skills that help you kind of get to decisions as quick as possible and bring innovations to life pretty quick. Some skills, I think, some of those translate really well to the academia, but I think there's a part of the academia, at least the way that the kind of philosophy that I was exposed when I was in school, and the kind of thinking that I wanted my students to have is like, yes, there's the problem solving aspect, but there's the aspect of reflecting and then challenging and then sometimes taking the longest way to solve a problem in
Hmm.
terms to push that field forward, right? I guess what I'm trying to say is like the practical experience, I think, is definitely something the academia can benefit from people like me, but there's also, I mean, let's not underestimate the high level thinking that is required for you to really push the field somewhere, right? So,
Hmm. That's a good point.
mhm.
What inspires you?
um, well, as I said, there's quite a lot of let's get to it approach to work in my field, right? So when I'm surrounded by figures and numbers and stuff, I try to inspire myself by looking at the work of some of my design heroes, right? David Carson, Jessica Hish, Dave McKean. And I guess, I mean, I look at some of their work, and their work has little or nothing to do with what I do today, right? So their work is like super kind of postmodern, like graphic design, typography, which is sometimes is considered not usable from the
Mhm.
perspective of, let's say, digital media and software and stuff, which I think is why they attract me so much. I think is like because it's very different than what I do on a day to day. Then they help me inspired.
Nice. Any advice you'd like to share?
Here's something that I tell a lot of people, not only designers, but basically any junior individual contributor on a team, that the questions has more power than you think, right? I
Mhm.
think we get trained a lot of a lot of the traditional education that we get is to solve problems and come up with answers. Like we need to answer. Like we get promoted, we get graded, we get rewarded by having the right answers, right? And I've been encouraging people to think a lot about, instead of having the right answers, to have the right questions, right? So a well placed, appropriately timed, thought provoking question really helps teams think through their decisions. Like this is, by the way, this is not mine. This is from Andy Stanley. So I mean, I would encourage anyone to just not be afraid of asking questions, right? So I know sometimes we tend to be perceived as like, oh, you're stupid or you don't know anything when you're asking questions. But I think teams they tend to look when they look back at some of the questions that they had to deal with during their process of their problem solving process. They tend to appreciate that person that was the one that was asking all the questions all the time.
That's great. And, we're talking about the academy, it also, I imagine, comes down to unlearning enough so that you can get to those questions that are the ones that you want to ask.
Yeah.
Number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? How do we follow you?
Well, I guess the easiest way is to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. But you can also follow my blog. I write a lot. I try to publish something useful at least once a week. You can find me at www.designative.info. That's www.designative.info. Designative.info.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Inmar. Great reconnecting after all these years. I've always known you as a person who had deep industry knowledge and user experience, and it seems to continue to go that way. And it's so exciting to be able to hear your ideas and understand where that journey is taking you. So thanks so much for being on.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to keep the conversation going.
Great. Thanks so much.